There's a strange moment that happens when a country legend turns 63. The crowds are still there, the hits still play, something has changed and people feel it before they can explain it. Travis Tritt turned 63 on February 9th, 2026. No scandal, no hospital announcement, no dramatic farewell tour. Just quiet, and sometimes quiet is louder than noise. If you grew up in the 90s, you remember what he was. Not just another Nashville voice. He wasn't polished radio country, he was rougher. Southern rock in his bones, long hair, leather jacket. That Georgia edge, here's a quarter. TR. O-U-B-L-E. Those weren't just songs. They were arguments, barroom confessions set to guitar. In the early 90s, he wasn't following trends. He was resisting them, but that was more than 30 years ago. And at 63, the spotlight doesn't behave the same way. Here's the part people don't talk about. He didn't fade. He didn't collapse. In survival and country music doesn't always get applause. In May 2019, he was riding his tour bus in South Carolina after a show. Late night, two-lane highway, another vehicle driving the wrong way. The crash wasn't his fault. He wasn't driving. The two people in the other vehicle died. The bus was damaged. Sirens cut through the dark. Blue lights flashing against trees. He later urged people not to drink and drive. He sounded steady when he said it, controlled. But there's a difference between sounding steady and feeling steady. Nothing in his career, not record deals, not award shows, prepares you for standing on a roadside knowing someone else didn't make it home while you did. That kind of night stays with you. Nothing dramatic followed. No media tour of grief. No public unraveling. He kept touring. I kept singing. But maybe he thought a little differently afterward. By the time he turned 63, something else was shifting. His kids were grown. Tyler Reese, Tristan, Terrian. Two of them pursuing music, stepping onto stages, releasing their own work, trying to build names without leaning entirely on his. That's pride. But it's complicated pride. Because the industry he fought his way through in the late 80s doesn't exist anymore. Streaming replaced record stores. Viral replaced radio buildup. Country music fractured into subgenres, pop crossovers, algorithm-driven hits. He once resisted Nashville polish. Now Nashville doesn't argue with him, it simply moved on. That's not bitterness. That's time. At 63, he isn't struggling financially. He isn't forgotten. But he occupies a different space now, heritage. That word sounds respectful. It can also feel like a museum label. His voice is still there. Watch live performances from 2023 or 2024. Weathered, yes, but strong, controlled. He stands still more. Now not because he can't move, because he doesn't need to. He plants himself. Lets the song work. That's what happens when someone has survived enough to stop chasing. There's no dramatic tragedy here. It's just a realization that the world that once revolved around you no longer needs to, and maybe never did. That realization arrives quietly. No headlines, just perspective. When people click on what happened to Travis Tritt at 63, they expect collapse. Instead, they find something heavier. He's still here, still singing, still stepping on stage, but carrying nights like South Carolina in 2019, carrying the knowledge that two lives ended while his continued. Carrying the shift from rebel to legacy act. You don't feel emotional because he fell. You feel it because he didn't. He was born February 9th, 1963, in Marietta, Georgia. Working class upbringing. A strict father who didn't applaud long-haired country rock dreams. When he chose music, it wasn't with support. It was against resistance. Small bars. Closed doors in Nashville. Executives unsure what to do with a guy who blended southern rock grit into country radio. He wasn't built in a boardroom. He forced his way in, and now decades later his children enter an industry even colder. Tyler Reese releasing music under the weight of comparison. She's leaning alternative, modern, less traditional. In 1991, when Country Club hit, radio mattered. By 1992, It's All About to Change went multi-platinum. That kind of breakthrough barely exists today. So what do you tell your kids? You can't hand them 1992. You can only watch. Watching might be harder than fighting. He tours selectively now. He performs for crowds who remember cassette tapes and CDs at Walmart. The applause carries memory more than novelty. There's a difference between relevance and reverence. Reverence sounds honorable. It's also quieter. Fans notice subtle things. A breath earlier than before, a song dropped half a key longer. Pause before a high note. It's not decline. It's reality. Age doesn't ask permission, but he doesn't chase youth. He doesn't sprint across the stage to prove something. His beard shows gray. His posture is steady, not explosive, intentional. That's not weakness. That's preservation. Country radio hasn't played new Travis Tritt singles in years. The industry that once argued with him now runs on algorithms. He never pivoted into bro country trends. That stubborn streak made him iconic. It also placed him outside the machine. And machines don't honor history, they count clicks. He tours on loyalty now. On people who grew up with him, that audience is aging alongside him. Shows feel nostalgic instead of chaotic, warm instead of explosive. And nostalgia is powerful but fragile. There's an unspoken question at every performance. How many more? Not because he's ill, not because he's retiring, because time doesn't negotiate. In the 90s, he was fighting for space. Now he's maintaining presence. That's a different kind of endurance. His marriage to Teresa Nelson has remained steady since 1997. No public implosions, no chaos, stability. Doesn't trend, but it builds weight. At 63, conversations shift. Less about chart positions. Weak. More about family, health, balance. Silence creeps in differently now. Longer gaps between releases. Fewer interviews. Less urgency to dominate headlines. Not disappearance selectiveness. After surviving something like the 2019 crash, you don't waste motion. You filter. Control used to mean fighting executives, arguing for sound, protecting image. You're now control. Might mean deciding when to show up and when not to. He doesn't flood social media. He doesn't chase controversy. He doesn't over-explain himself. He plays the songs that defined him, owns the era that built him. It's controlled too. When he walks on stage now and begins anymore, the crowd sings before he does. Not louder, just immediate. That's legacy. Recognition without introduction in interviews. He's described as a big part of the 90s, past tense, respectful but past. He didn't implode to get there. He aged in public. That's harder to dramatize and heavier to watch. 63, what happened? Nothing dramatic. He survived Nashville politics, survived fame, survived a fatal accident he didn't cause. Survived industry evolution. Survived becoming classic instead of current. Survival changes posture. It softens edges. Not weakness, perspective. There's a moment during recent shows when he steps back from the mic after a big chorus and just looks at the crowd. He doesn't rush. He lets them sing. That's not theatrics. That's someone who understands. This isn't about proving he can still hit the note. It's about sharing the memory of it. The rebel in the black hat didn't disappear. He just exists differently. He stopped fighting shadows, stopped trying to outrun time, stopped needing to dominate. He didn't fade. He settled, and settling, when you've spent decades charging forward, can look like surrender from the outside. It isn't. It's maturity without spectacle. Fans don't get emotional because they're watching collapse. They get emotional because they're watching endurance. Because one day these performances become archival footage. One day the tour quietly becomes the last one. Not announced, just finished. But today at 63, he's still here. Voice weathered but steady, marriage intact. Children building their own paths. No chaos. Just continuation. And continuation is rarely dramatic. Legacy doesn't shout. It stands there and lets time pass through it. Right now, Travis Tritt is still standing, still singing. Just more softly. And sometimes, after everything, softness is strength. And maybe that's the part no one prepares you for, the moment when strength no longer looks like force. There was a time when every performance felt like a declaration, like he was proving something to Nashville, to radio programmers, to critics who didn't quite know where to place him. The mix of southern rock and country grit wasn't supposed to work the way it did, but it did, and when it did, it exploded. Multi-platinum albums, Grammy recognition. He wasn't just participating in the 90s country boom, shaping it. Now there's nothing left to prove. That shift can be disorienting for someone who built an identity on resistance. When your career starts as a fight, what do you do when there's no one left to fight? When the industry that once pushed back simply nods respectfully and files you under influence? At 63, he doesn't argue with the present, doesn't try to outpace it, he exists alongside it. That's a quieter kind of confidence. There's something almost poetic about the way his shows feel now. The lights still dim, the band still hits the opening chord, the crowd still rises. But instead of urgency, there's communion. Instead of adrenaline, there's acknowledgement. He isn't battling for relevance, sharing space with people who have carried his songs through marriages, divorces, road trips, funerals, and backyard barbecues. Those songs don't belong to him alone anymore. And that realization, your art has outgrown you, can be both humbling and heavy. He once stood at the center of country music's loudest years, the format wars, the debates about authenticity, the tension between polish and grit. He represented something raw at a time when raw felt necessary. Now country music is global, genre-blended, streaming-driven. It moves faster than radio ever did, but speed doesn't equal depth. At 63, depth is what he carries. Decades of stages, thousands of miles, a near-fatal highway memory, a family that grew up while he toured, a fan base that matured alongside him. There's a different look in his eyes during recent performances. Not tired, not defeated, aware that every show is a gift, aware that voices don't last forever, aware that the body keeps score, even when the spirit doesn't want to. And awareness changes everything. He doesn't oversing to prove he still can. He doesn't stretch songs beyond their truth. Trust them. That trust only comes after years of knowing exactly what your voice can and cannot do. Fans sometimes search for dramatic explanations because drama is easier to process. What happened implies a sharp turn, a fall, a revelation. But sometimes, what happened is simply this. A man reached an age where ambition softened into gratitude. That doesn't trend. It doesn't shock. It doesn't generate scandal-driven headlines, but it resonates when he stands under stage lights now. Gray in his beard catching the glow. He isn't trying to reclaim 1992. He isn't competing with a version of himself that only exists in archived footage. He's honoring him. There's dignity in that. He survived being underestimated. Survived being categorized. Or survived watching peers fade away or burn out. Survived an accident that could have rewritten everything in a second. Survived the slow shift from headline act to legacy name, and here's the quiet truth. Survival is a form of victory. At 63, the fight isn't external anymore. It's internal. It's about maintaining voice, health, balance. It's about choosing presence over noise. It's about letting your children step forward without stepping in front of them. It's about accepting that legacy isn't built in a year. It's layered over decades. There's no tragic twist waiting in this chapter. No hidden confession. No collapse behind closed doors. Just a man who once roared, deciding he no longer needs to roar to be heard, and that might be the most human part of the story, because in the end, what happened to him at 63 isn't loss. It's transition. He moved from proving to preserving, from conquering to CURATING, from dominating rooms to sharing them. The voice is still there. The songs are still there. The crowds still rise when the first chord rings out. But now, when he steps back from the mic and lets thousands sing the chorus, there's something unspoken in that exchange, a mutual understanding. That time is moving for all of them. He isn't fighting it. He's standing in it. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing an artist can do. And when you stand in time instead of fighting it, something unexpected happens. You start seeing your life not as chapters of success or decline, but as one long arc of becoming. At 63, the pace slows just enough for reflection to catch up. There are likely mornings now that feel different than the ones in 1993. Fewer airport sprints, fewer late-night label calls, no quiet coffee before the day begins, more awareness of how many years have passed since those first bar gigs in Georgia. More understanding of how fragile momentum really was. Fame always feels permanent when you're inside it. Looking back, it feels impossibly brief. The early 90s were loud. not just culturally, but emotionally. Every award nomination mattered. Every chart position felt urgent, every review felt personal. There was pressure to stay on top, to defend territory, to prove the sound wasn't a fluke. That kind of intensity builds legends, but it also builds fatigue. Now the urgency is gone, and when urgency leaves, truth steps in. The truth is that careers don't end in explosions most of the time. They narrow, they refine. Spaces that feel earned rather than chased. That's where he is now, in a space that isn't about ascent, but about steadiness. He doesn't have to reintroduce himself. He doesn't have to rebrand. Doesn't have to shock anyone to stay visible. His name already carries weight, not trending weight, historical weight. There's something almost sacred about that, because history isn't loud, it's steady. Can see it in the way audiences react now. They're not screaming for discovery, they're standing for recognition. They're not watching a star rise. They're witnessing a presence that has endured long enough to become part of their own timeline. When he sings certain lines, you can feel that shared mileage in the room. People who once blasted those songs from pickup trucks now arrive with reading glasses and grown children. They don't just remember the lyrics, they remember who they were when they first heard them. And when he sings, it's like he's unlocking versions of themselves they thought time had erased. That's not fame, that's imprint. An imprint lasts longer than trends. There's also something deeply human about the way he seems to occupy space now. Less edge, less defiance, more composure. Fire hasn't vanished, it's contained, controlled, like a flame that learned it. He doesn't need to leap to prove it burns. Age doesn't steal identity. It clarifies it. At 63, he doesn't need to argue about what country music should be. He already contributed his piece. The genre evolved as genres do. Some directions he might not recognize, some he might quietly respect. But there's no urgency to correct it. That battle was fought decades ago, and maybe that's what maturity looks like for someone who once thrived on resistance, letting the world move without feeling erased by it. There's a subtle courage in that, because it's easier to rage against irrelevance than to accept transition with grace. It's easier to manufacture controversy than to quietly remain consistent. It's easier to chase youth than to inhabit age. He chose to inhabit it. You don't see dramatic reinventions. You don't see desperate collaborations. You don't see public attempts to insert himself into younger conversations. What you see is continuity. The same core sound, the same grounded presence, the same commitment to the songs that built him. Continuity. Doesn't make headlines, but it builds trust, and trust is why people still buy tickets. Not because they expect spectacle, because they expect authenticity. At this stage, authenticity is the only currency that matters. There's a moment every artist eventually faces, the realization that applause will one day stop, not because of scandal, but because time closes the door gently. That awareness doesn't create panic in everyone. Sometimes it creates peace. He looks more at peace now than panicked. Peace doesn't mean resignation. It means alignment. It means understanding that the roar of your 30s doesn't need to echo forever to have mattered. It means knowing that the songs have already outlived their original moment and will likely outlive him. That's the real legacy, not trophies, not chart positions, not streaming numbers. Songs sung by strangers decades later. At 63, he stands at the intersection of memory and presence, not retreating, not advancing, just existing in a space that feels earned, and maybe that's what feels emotional to people because it reminds them of themselves. They see their own transitions reflected in his. The fire of youth turning into steadiness, the urgency softening into gratitude, hunger shifting into appreciation. He isn't disappearing, he's distilling, stripping away everything that was noise and keeping only what matters: voice, family, integrity, history. So what happened to him at 63? Time happened. Perspective happened. Survival happened. He didn't lose himself. He became a quieter version of the same man, and in a culture obsessed with collapse and comeback, there's something profoundly moving about a story that's simply about continuation. No breakdown, no reinvention, just a man still walking on stage, still gripping the microphone, still letting thousands sing before he does, and understanding exactly what that means. Sometimes the loudest statement a legend can make is this: I'm still here. And that's enough.